Before we begin, I'd like to make this disclosure. This episode was specifically intended to be about 9/11, the mechanics of 9/11, and the discussion of whether or not it was physically knocked down by controlled explosives, an idea that I find beyond ridiculous, and the the theory I accept, and I've seen proven that physics brought the buildings down. A major impact from a 400,000-pound object at 400 plus miles an hour that destroyed the core of several floors, and the fire eventually warping the metal and causing the buildings to collapse. I'll leave links. I mentioned them in today's show as well. But there is no direct route to anything with Susan. I have found in all these episodes, when I would approach something controversial and ask a direct question, hoping to get a direct answer, I would get long narratives. I won't call them rants. And after some heavy editing, I decided to start leaving the rants in there because they're illustrative, illuminating. And I wanted people to get a feel for what I'm seeing regarding Susan. In the process of today's show, you'll find out she's responsible for rolling up Abu Nidal. That everything that seems significant that happened between the Libyans and the Iraqis and the United States for 10 years was Susan. Okay? We'll let her make that case. We finally do start dinging on 9/11, the actual event, but that was after, an hour and a half of raw video. This is still a significant show. I'm not going to break it into two. I'm going to let the whole thing run. And you can decide for yourself where you stand on these issues. That no one came away from this thinking that I was okay with a lot of it. I'm not. Or that I agreed with any of it. So that's the disclaimer. The issues and views suggested by the guests do not reflect the views of the P4B. Not that they're scary, they just don't make sense. But you decide. Take a look, enjoy.
This is the Free Zone Communique, transmitting from Virginia's unoccupied sector. If you think smart cities, DEI, censorship, government intrusion, bug paste, and other left-wing nonsense are no longer a possibility, think again. We've won one election with slim majorities. Our work to rebuild a free and sane America has just begun.
This is the Free Zone Communique on the P4B, bringing hope to victims trapped behind the wire in blue cities. We have a guest coming up. She's been here in 2 previous episodes. This was the promised 9/11 episode. And I will do my best to nail Linda's foot to the floor so we can finally talk about 9/11. We'll get to as much of that as possible. I know we stuck a pin in several subjects in the previous episodes, and hopefully we'll be able to get through everything in one shot today. It'll be interesting. There'll be debate. I'm not going to go easy on Susan. She's got a book to promote, and I support that. And she has a point of view, and I support people having a point of view. But in a lot of ways, we don't agree. And the more research I do, the more things we have to disagree about. But primary among them would have to be 9/11. I will leave 2 links below that talk about the way I see 9/11 having occurred. It's a very logical explanation. It doesn't take a nuclear physicist to understand how those buildings, yes, they can come down. I read something significant just yesterday. Oh, you can't knock those buildings down with fire. That's an aspirational statement. Like the Titanic is unsinkable. In a lot of ways, the Titanic was a hell of a ship and very close to unsinkable, unless you have the perfect situation where you can actually sink it. You can't destroy a building by fire until you can. And there's a lot of physics behind that. So we'll try to get to all that.
Great.
And joining us now is Susan Lindauer. As promised, we will jump right into 9/11. I've been teasing that for 2 episodes. I wanted to get right to it because I don't want the headlines to read "Podcaster dead. His audience killed him." And I've done that. I mean, I've gone 3 episodes with somebody saying we're going to get to such and such. It took forever to get there with Kurt Weldon, and we actually never did. So we have a standing agreement. We'll come back and have our debate later. And I'll tell you, as I said earlier, I'm going to be tough.
I like that. I welcome that. That's good. That's good. I like that.
I won't be as tough as, say, Megyn Kelly will be on Jake Tapper, but you know, there's a lot of things that need to be challenged.
Sure.
Then the biggest is 9/11. I think I said in the previous discussion, extraordinary assertions require extraordinary evidence. And we will discuss those things as we go.
I'd like to address that right off the top.
Yeah.
Because I have the distinction of having held a hearing on the 9/11 warnings in the Southern District of New York, in the federal courthouse, 1,000 feet from where the World Trade Center used to stand. And my witness was not a 9/11 truther. He was a computer scientist who was a civilian, not military related, not CIA intelligence. And he recounted in federal court, sworn under oath in front of a U.S. district attorney and a U.S. federal judge, that I gave advance warning to his family and him throughout the spring and summer of 2001. So he actively testified in federal court, sworn under oath, and he was very methodical and slow speaking. He chose his words very carefully, and he's a computer science geek. So it was not a passionate tirade for any subject. He's a very shy man. And so he was highly aware of the implications of what he was saying. And he chose his words very carefully. And he informed the court that I gave advance warning to him in the spring and summer of 2001, and that he had informed the FBI of my 9/11 warnings 3 or 4 months after my arrest. And he said, before you ever sent Susan Lindauer to prison for this, pretending that she was, quote, not competent to stand trial, I had already confirmed for the FBI that everything Susan Lindauer had said was true. So so this has been verified in a court of law. This has been sworn testimony.
You had the hearing, or you were at a hearing?
We held a hearing in New York City.
Who would we be?
To establish my attorney and I.
Okay.
Held a hearing.
Okay, hold that thought. Before we get too far away from one point.
We'll go back to 9/11.
No, I want to go back to that hearing. What was the nature of the warning? What did you tell this witness that in the form of a warning? What did you say to him?
What he testified in court was that I warned him through the spring and summer of 2001, starting in April, May, that we expected a major terrorism strike on the World Trade Center, specifically involving airplane hijackings and or airplane bombings, and that we expected mass casualties. We expected the attack at the end of August or early September, and that we knew that it would complete the cycle from the first World Trade Center attack in 1993, and that it was somehow involved the Iraqis, that they were watching the Iraqis for involvement in this issue, which is of course what I was doing.
Well, I was just looking at the appendix in the book. Did you include a transcript of that in the appendix? I haven't gotten through all of it.
We include a transcript in the book itself. Yes.
His testimony.
Of his testimony. Yes.
Okay.
He was testifying on behalf of factually on behalf of a notorious spy who was falsely accused. Now, I will tell you, I will stomp my feet on this one. Never did I receive money from the Iraqi government. That is not true. I paid for my own trips to New York. I live in Maryland, so it's a 3-hour drive to New York City. I paid for my own trips to New York. I did the negotiations with Iraq's ambassador and senior diplomats on resuming the weapons inspections. So I was the one doing all of these things.
One of the transcripts says you were accused of sitting down with the intelligence arm of the Iraq.
Oh, sure, of course. Of course, because those are the kind of people who, when you have one spy who's going in there, they always, that's always what they do. They whoever you're dealing with in that embassy, you know in advance. We expected in advance that when you're sitting down with somebody, they are also intelligence. There is only a few people who would be allowed to speak with me.
Okay.
And they would be monitoring for their own intelligence. They would be monitoring anyone who comes into the embassy. That's exactly what they would do. That's normal.
And from whence cometh the authority to negotiate with a foreign government?
Yeah.
Regarding U.S. policy, the inspection negotiations you talk about.
Very important question. Very important question. So this was approved by the CIA and the Pentagon.
I'm trying to get very specific here.
Mm-hmm.
Who authorized you in the United States to
George Tenet
as an agent for the United States and to negotiate things?
That would have been George Tenet, who was the director of the CIA.
George Tenet told you could do that?
Through my CIA handler, yes. This was approved. It was absolutely
approved. Your CIA handler
from the very top of the CIA. It was approved.
Richard told you it was approved from the top.
Well,
George Tenet, a very serious man, gives.
I had negotiated. Listen. You have to be, but you guys have to be careful that you're thinking that I'm like this little girl. I'm not a little girl. I by this time I've given advance warning about the 1993 World Trade Center attack, advance warning about the bombing of the USS Cole. I've negotiated the Lockerbie trial with Libya. I've persuaded the Libyans to hand over 2 men for trial when they said they would never do it in a million years. I have done one of the very first investigations of Osama bin Laden. The problem that is through this whole thing with me is you are seeing me as a nice, sweet little woman.
Let's take Susan.
But what I'm saying to you is,
let's take Susan out of the picture. I'm going to replace.
I had approval to do it.
Harry. Now here's.
I had approval to do it. I had done, but
right, just bear with me. Let me get through this thought, and then you can hit me back. Harry works for Richard. He's not paid. He has no official portfolio.
Oh, that's a knock situation.
And
a knock is non-official.
Richard tells George Tenet, basically, I want Harry, going back earlier, I want Harry to negotiate with the Libyans over Lockerbie while the Dutch are doing it. But I want
Dutch aren't doing
Harry
it.
to go. And
the Dutch are not.
And Tenet doesn't know Harry.
Not doing it. No one is doing it. That's the point. Nobody is doing it. So what happens is that instead what they say is, Richard Few says, we have someone who is capable of doing this, who's shown that she knows how to handle terrorism. This is somebody who is dealing with Middle Eastern arms traders. I was known to these people. I am a known quantity to Ahmed Jibril. I'm a known quantity to Abu Nidal. I got Abu Nidal deported out of Libya. My operation went beyond just negotiating the Lockerbie trial. I had an operation to remove the terrorists out of Libya, and I was involved. I was the direct person for that. So I was doing all kinds of things that would surprise you, that are very deep, and therefore Saddam Hussein already knew me, and George Tenet knew me, and all these, and I was a known quantity. The problem was, and during the big difference is that during the Clinton years versus George Bush had presented himself to the world during his campaign that he lied, he was not honest. He said that he was not going to start a second war with Iraq. And therefore, it appeared that he would be open to this kind of negotiation by a successful negotiator who had already done all these other things. I didn't just, wasn't just somebody off the street saying, I want to go do this. I actually had built up a portfolio doing it. And therefore, when they said, Susan's going to do it, I know exactly who I was. As George Tenet has testified in front of Congress, he could count on one hand the number of agents that he had inside Iraq. And I would have been one of those 5. He knew exactly who I was. They were watching every single thing that I did. They had the rooms bugged where I was in. They had cameras, pictures of me going in and out with the ambassador's office.
Yeah, I remember you said in 2002 there was evidence that a room might have been bugged.
Yeah. So I mean, this was
by that time, and we're going. We jumped off 9/11 already.
Okay, we have to go back to 9/11.
2002. Okay. I'm going to write that down. 2002.
Okay. So because we have to come back to that, but let's do the 9/11 first.
Yeah.
So because then this will all make sense. This will all make sense in a minute.
Okay. Your assertion that my key interest here is the debate that's going on, that's been going on since the day after. That number one, George Bush knew.
Yes.
That anybody knew.
Yes.
And number two, the towers were knocked down using controlled explosives, a controlled demolition. That's the kind of stuff I talk about that needs extraordinary evidence.
Yeah. Well, what I know about is, what I can tell you is ties to Iraq. And so there's some things I can answer and some things I cannot. Okay. But what I was able to, what my friend testified in court was that, and I'll tell you specifically, in April and May, I was contacted by my CIA handler. He said, I have a message for the Iraqis. I want you to go to New York as quickly as possible. And I want you to sit down with the ambassador, with the senior diplomats. I want you to tell them that we are seeking any fragment of any intelligence involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. These were very specific things as of April of 2001. And he said, I want you to go and tell them that if they fail to give us that intelligence, we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age harder than they've ever been bombed before. And I smiled at him. I said, okay. Hold on, please. Please let me finish. So I go up to them and I'm very nice. I'm very friendly. I say, oh, hey, you guys have been so helpful to us in the past. We're watching for a new terrorist attack. And Saddam's intelligence was the best on terrorism. The Iraqi government was always cooperative. This was one area that Iraq knew that they could achieve real positive results. So they were always positive and helpful on terrorism. And so I said, we need to, we're looking for this intelligence. The diplomat said, okay, I'll send a cable to Baghdad. I'll let them know. I said, thank you. Have a nice day. So I go back to Washington. I sit down with my CIA handlers. Come in. I want you to tell me what the Iraqis said when you threatened them. I said, oh, I didn't threaten them. I didn't need to. I just told them to send a cable to Baghdad and let me know what they said. He said, I didn't tell you to be nice to those people. I want you to go back to New York right now. And I want you to tell, you don't ever, this is not your message. This is our message. We are looking for this intelligence on an airplane attack on the World Trade Center, and we demand that they hand over this intelligence to us.
Okay,
and if he said, I want you to tell them, and this is very important, I want you to tell them this message originates above the Secretary of State and above the director of the CIA. And he said, and now that is only 3 people. That is the President of the United States, that is the Vice President of the United States, and that is the Secretary of Defense. Above the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, and above the CIA Director, George Tenet, 3 people, the President, George Bush, the Vice President, Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. Now that's as of April. So I go back up to the Iraqis. I said, you know what, man, I messed up. I did not give you the right message. And I've been ordered to give you the correct message. I said, I got yelled at. And he yelled at me, and he stomped around the table, circling me on the conference table, saying, damn it, I told you not to do. I told you to give him a message. This is not your message. It is our message. Okay.
Let me ask 2 questions there.
Okay.
First, you said you paid your own freight going back and forth on these trips. You paid your
and
own
Richard
fare.
would reimburse me. And Richard would reimburse me.
Reimburse you. Okay. And
It's only 200 miles, and it's not a big deal. It's like it's I could drive in 3 hours. It's okay. It was not a big deal at all. So first of all,
it's one thing to say it's not a big deal if you don't mind making the drive.
No, I don't mind. I did.
Entirely different thing, and I'm trying to put myself in
they were absolutely. Well, we need to come back to your question: is why did they harass me? Because I knew everything.
We will get there. We will get there.
Yeah.
My question is, or my observation at this point is, you are going up there and you're getting reimbursed, but you're not a paid person. You don't have a clearance.
That is exactly why I could do it.
No,
there are requirements for doing something like this, and I had to meet the whole point was that it had to be somebody who was not officially part of the CIA in order for them to have deniability in dealing with Congress. This had to do with deniability in Congress. It's a black op. It's a black operation. This is how black operations work.
Why would they deny diplomacy? An act of diplomacy?
Because they're stupid.
Okay,
they're really
not an explanation. But
no, that is an explanation, because they don't respect. They look at diplomacy, unfortunately, as weakness and appeasement, and they want to say that they are giving the orders to Saddam, and Saddam's going to obey the orders. And the world doesn't work that way. Somebody actually has to go in and sit down and talk with them and work out how it's going to be done. And a lot of the work that I did had to do with how they would do it differently than they had done the first regimen of weapons inspections that didn't work,
and
that failed.
This communication comes down from POTUS VP DOD.
We're going to bomb them to hell and back.
All the way down to an unpaid person without a clearance.
No, that's not true.
Drive to New York.
Hold on. See, you're presuming that's a big presumption. That's a big presumption that I don't have clearance. I am the source of the intelligence. I am the source of real intelligence. The problem is that the intelligence that they're communicating in the media and in the New York Times has nothing to do with reality. It is completely divorced from what's actually happening in Iraq. And that is why they become terrified of me talking. Because if I'm there saying, oh, yeah, 6 months before 9/11, when I went back in May, the Iraqi answer was, okay, we have already agreed after the bombing of the USS Cole, we have already agreed to allow the FBI to send a terrorism task force in. So you go back to Washington and tell the FBI and tell your sources at the CIA. You go back to Washington and tell your sources that we will expedite any visa for the FBI to send a terrorism task force into Baghdad, and I will personally notify the ambassador and that at meeting, if I'm not at the office, if I'm outside, if the diplomat is saying this to me, the diplomat says, if I'm outside the embassy, I will interrupt any meeting and I will be back here in 10 minutes and we will get the FBI their visas and they can go straight into Baghdad. That is not the message that George Bush wanted to communicate about Iraq. That is not the message that John McCain wanted to communicate. When the Iraqis, when John McCain and Dick Cheney held after 9/11, there was a diplomat named Al Anai who allegedly had meetings with Mohammed Atta, one of the 9/11 hijackers, in Budapest, and Dick Cheney and John McCain both were on like the Sunday morning talk shows. Well, it turns out, and they were demanding that the FBI must have immediate access to Al Anai. So I was in New York that day, and the Iraqi answer was yes, we'll have the meetings. You're not going to find it very helpful because he's not a radical Islamist. He drinks, he smokes, he chases women. He's not a fundamentalist, and he would have zero sympathy for Islamic radicalism. If anything, he would be reporting to us. And the guy who I was interviewing, the diplomat who had once tried to defect to the United States, who would then go on to be a major source of intelligence on terrorism, who would arrest, who would orchestrate the shootout of Abu Nidal in Baghdad at my request.
You requested.
Okay, this is the guy. And he said, I've interviewed Al Anai, and I can tell you he doesn't know anything, but you're welcome to interview him. So immediately when Dick Cheney and John McCain say, we want to interview the guy, the Iraqis say the same day, yes. And immediately the same day, I go back to Washington and I prepare a briefing for Andy Card, who is my cousin. And I say, you're welcome to interview him. The Iraqis have consented. But you see the justifications for the war fall apart even faster and worse. And here we have impeachment talk. We have the allies who are furious the war is going badly. The soldiers are getting their arms and legs blown off. They're getting Dear John letters. There's forced I want to say there's a terminology for it when you're required to have like multiple tours of duty even beyond your the date of your when you're supposed to. Yeah. And they won't let you leave the military, and so you have kids who are just like broken, who have post-traumatic stress, who have psychological disorders coming out of, they're losing their lives.
We did talk about this last time, and we just we're making huge leaps.
Okay.
And I want to catch these things as they come.
Okay.
You requested the arrest of Abu Nidal?
Yes.
Just
when I was in Baghdad. Yes.
Nobody else in the United States.
Well, Abu Nidal had been part of Lockerbie. Abu Nidal was, the part of the problem that we have is that, and this is not your fault, but your fault personally, but the politicians have lied. They don't know, they don't have factual information. They've been given wrong information, and then they demand that they circle the wagons, and they demand the intelligence community protect them. This is always about the intelligence community has to protect the politicians in Washington who don't want anyone to know what's really going on, because it shows how way off base they are.
Well, that's
So
not
there had always been
but I need
an
to ask
order.
again.
If you
You
can
need
get
to ask
Abu Nidal, you get him, because we knew that Abu Nidal did Lockerbie.
We tracked
that
him.
was-
We tracked him for years.
Yeah, but we
Yeah.
know that Abu Nidal did Lockerbie, and I was always under orders. If we can ever get somebody who's tied to the Lockerbie case, we take them out, and so we did.
You had
But going back to 9/11, in
okay,
this,
but before we do that, try to put yourself in the place of the listener right now.
okay,
Okay. We will stipulate for the moment, just for the moment, that everything you've said so far about your efforts and how
Yeah.
and the genesis of them is 100% true.
yeah,
But as it comes at me, and as I read the book, I made a note, John Nash and Captain Quigg. As I read the book, I see wild assertions, one after another, one after another, one after another.
they're not wild assertions.
Very
Factually
little,
true.
Very
They're
little,
factually true.
but that's the problem. There's, like I said, extraordinary evidence. I see
Yeah.
paltry evidence. I see you offering evidence in the way of, this is how I interpreted the situation, so it must be X. And I was the one who took care of that. But
I was.
that's
I was the one who did the negotiations.
your story could be written. Your story, every detail of your story and everything you're saying right now could be written with the 100% clarity of hindsight, and then injecting yourself into the story.
No, I did it in
There's
real
no
time.
way people.
I did it in real time. That's what happened in real time. That's the problem is that the lies that they told were enormous, and when they needed to shut down, they had to, in order to protect the official story of Iraq and 9/11, they had to destroy the people who actually know who were part of it, who actually did it.
What about
And that
all the
was
other
me.
people who are saying the same thing you're saying? They're not being destroyed. They're out there walking around, and they're saying, they're making the same accusations as you make, but they're not saying I did it.
But I was the one
Oh,
in the
okay.
room with the Iraqi diplomats, and they weren't. I was the one sitting down inside the Iraqi embassy. And anyway, so let me just come back to 9/11.
9/11,
and
9/11, yeah, 9/11.
let's focus on that, okay? Because we're getting distracted by what comes later. I'd love to talk about what comes later.
And we have the predictions now. It's the morning of 9/11. It's the morning of.
Okay, and I've told you already about my calls to Attorney General John Ashcroft on August 8th, right?
Yeah, now I have to ask you that question. Why in the name of Christ would a guy, you tell me Richard Fuse was. a
See,
big
you're
bucking
trying to
buck at the
say-
CIA. Well, wait for the question. He's a big guy in the CIA. Everybody knows he's authoritative.
He lived next door to Colin
Richard
Powell.
Tells
Yeah.
Susan, who is an asset. Okay, basically
Yes.
a gopher.
No. See, that is the problem. You're trying to diminish what we did. This is how real intelligence gets done.
Talking about your
Somebody goes and
relationship with
does it.
Richard. Richard tells you, you go. Richard tells you, you go. That was your relationship. You didn't go to the Iraqis and say, we'll bomb you, when nobody said those words to you.
That was being a back channel. Yes,
that's
I was a back channel.
So
I was a
that's-
back channel.
Yeah, that's the person that Richard says, you, Susan, must contact the Justice Department on this.
Well,
You
so what we did,
have
hold
no
on. What
cachet.
wrong? See, wrong about everything. on August 2nd, the FBI, Robert Mueller was having his confirmation hearings.
Right.
And for the FBI director in the Senate. And Richard and I had a conversation on that date that what would happen if this terrorist attack that we were all expecting throughout the summer, what would happen if it was carried out before the Senate approved the nomination of the FBI director? What if there was no FBI director when the terrorist attack occurred? And I said to him, Richard, do you think it's that soon? He said, oh, I think it's imminent. I think it's absolutely going to happen, in just a matter of weeks. And I said, God, I've got to go back to New York one more time. He said, oh, I do not want you going back to New York until after this attack is over. I want you to stay out of New York. And I said, Richard, I've got to go back. I've been hounding the Iraqis all summer long for any fragment of intelligence on this attack. And I said, I will go back one more time. And he said, one more, and then you don't go back again. That was on August 2nd. That was a Thursday. On Saturday, August 4th, I went up to New York and I sat down. They said, we don't know anything. All of this is circular, Susan, coming back to you. So we're not getting anything except that it is all originating out of Washington, D.C. And then I went to Richard Fuisz on August 6th, and I had a meeting to report what I'd discussed on August 4th. And we said, okay, we have to do something. We believe this is going to happen. So that was August 6th. So it ended up being August 8th that I was able to, and August 6th is also the date when the presidential briefing memo was given by Richard Clarke to George Bush in Crawford, Texas. And he says, okay, you got that off your chest. Now let's go play golf.
He said
that was George Bush's reaction. Okay, that was August 6th. My intelligence had contributed to that briefing memo. So then he said, okay, let's get this up. So then Richard and I talked about it, and we said, okay, we got to do something. We've got to alert the Justice Department. And because I had the direct contacts with the Iraqis and the Libyans, I was able to call up the FBI director, his private staff, and I had been given a phone number that I was only supposed to use in the event my chain of command, which was Richard and Paul, was not available. That if I knew of any terrorist attack and I could not get hold of my handlers, then I would give them this information. So this was the only time I ever used it. And I called them up, and I was told that whoever picked up that phone could look across the room and lay eyes on the Attorney General. And I called them up and I said, okay, we need to put out an emergency alert across all federal agencies seeking any fragment of intelligence involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center as a known target. We are expecting mass casualties. We expect the possibility of a mini nuclear bomb to go off. And we expect long-term damage in New York and mass casualties. And the lady said, who answered the phone said, she gave me a phone number for the Office of Counterterrorism. She said, I want you to call and repeat exactly what you just said to me, repeat it to them. That was August 8th.
Okay.
By August 8th, that afternoon, I went and I sat outside Andrew Card's house for 2 hours in Virginia. I went to his house and sat in my car outside his house, chain smoking for 2 hours. And he didn't come home. He was probably already on vacation. It was August, August recess in Washington. You know what that's like. Everybody's gone. It's super hot. Nobody's around. So he had probably gone off, but I waited for 2 hours and then left his house feeling that it was probably the greatest mistake, that I would regret it for the rest of my life. And for a long time I did.
Okay. And that's in the book. But also in the book, and this might sound like a minor point, looking at it from your side.
Mhm.
But like I said, I'm being the viewer here.
Mhm.
Richard is an employee of the CIA, you said.
Mhm.
He is an active agent with a CIA ID. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, and he had millions of dollars in
Why didn't
contracts.
he call? You said, Richard, I was desperately trying to get a hold of the Justice Department, quote, as
Because I was the
as
one,
commanded
because
by
I
Richard.
was the one, I was the one in direct contact with Iraq and Libya. And so therefore, this was another way. We had already fed our intelligence through the CIA channels, through the presidential briefing memo. Now they wanted someone from the field, which is, I'm like a field asset. So they wanted someone from the field to deliver the same message at exactly the same time that they were receiving it from headquarters through official channels in a presidential briefing memo. They wanted a field person to come in and repeat what they were saying at the same time, so that it would be coming from both sides.
We established in a previous episode that although we were banging away on Iraq for information,
Mhm.
they didn't
have it.
They didn't have it. So what
They
was
did
the
not have
point
it
of you talking about it as
because
opposed to anybody?
because we knew the attack was coming.
How did you know?
We all knew.
How did you know? I was watching the chatter, and I heard people say the things we have to worry about are all the major Capitol buildings, all the major commercial sites, Sears Tower, Twin Towers. They were all on the list, and there was a lot of chatter, especially on toward the end. But I don't know anybody. I don't know a single human being
We
on
were
the
looking specifically at the World Trade Center. That was it. It was
Where
always
did you
airplane
get that
hijack
information?
from Richard Hughes, which is
Where did Richard
which
Hughes
raises the
get it?
very interesting question: is what the Iraqis said was, this intelligence comes from you. This is coming from Washington. And therefore, that raises the question of, did we let it happen or did we make it happen? Because we knew the dates, we knew the target, we knew the methodology, we knew it involved airplane hijackings.
You say we,
Specifically,
but you did
very
not collect this
specifically.
information. Richard did. You say Richard collected this
But
information.
we discussed it for months. This was always, 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 always very specific. Airplane hijackings, airplane bombings, airplane hijackings, and we believed that the airplanes would be transporting a bomb. So we did believe that. We believed there would be airplane hijackings, and the airplanes would transport a bomb that would strike the World Trade Center and result in detonations. That's how we saw it happening.
Tom Clancy wrote a book in '96. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It ends with a Japanese pilot on a flight without passengers. He's transporting a 747 from A to B, and crashes it into the Capitol building during a joint session of Congress. The State of the Union address basically decapitates the government. When I read that, it struck me, why have we not nailed cockpit doors shut like the Israelis did? Israelis stopped having hijackings in like 72 or 73 because you cannot access the cockpit under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
An emergency, you can't get there.
Yeah.
And the second thought that entered my head was they must be onto something. Everybody reads Clancy. I mean, the whole government reads Clancy. So
this was actually Ramzi Yousef's idea. Ramzi Yousef, in the first World Trade Center attack, 1993, was the mastermind of that attack. And he had come up with an idea of hijacking airplanes and crashing them into
I'm wondering if he read Clancy and our people didn't. I don't know. But nobody, again, you say Richard knew. Richard told you. You guys discussed the hell out of it.
Repeatedly.
But
endlessly.
Where did he acquire that information?
Well, now that is very...
Where?
Well, that see, you're fighting this. You're fighting, but it's interesting because it's like there is Richard is CIA, and so am I, and part of it is that the reason I would be sent out there is because I don't look like I'm CIA. I look like I'm this very nice little person. I look like I'm this nice little person, and I'm the last person you would expect. That's why I'm good, because I can get all this stuff done, and I'm going to make you forget in 5 seconds that you're dealing with a spook.
That doesn't answer the question.
It does answer the question.
How did
because you are
Richard
because
get this information? Where did it come from?
from the CIA. It came from inside. It was, and this goes to the question of, did we let it happen or did we make it happen?
It also goes to the requirement of extraordinary proof.
Well, the fact is, we knew about it. We knew about it. We knew about it. We discussed it with lots of people. Like I said at the beginning, my witness, who is a civilian, testified that I discussed it repeatedly with him in the spring and summer of 2001.
You didn't tell him the Twin Towers were going to come down. You told him the Twin Towers were going to come down?
Yes.
I thought
It would involve airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. And it would involve a miniature nuke. A mini nuke is what we thought it would be. Now, it turned out to be different types of explosives. Okay. But we didn't think it, we thought it would be a mini nuke. It turns out to have involved different explosives.
All right.
But that's okay, because we knew exactly what was going to happen. We told him, he testified in court that I told his family to stay out of the city in late August or early September, because we feared that mass casualties and they would probably die, that there was a chance they could die.
You told them
they needed to stay out of the city.
Weaponized planes smashing into buildings. You told them that.
Yes.
You were releasing classified information. You told
I
me you
did.
were stickler against that.
Yes, I did. I did.
You said you didn't do that in other parts of the book. That's something you would never do.
I did it. I definitely told him. Absolutely. And he testified to that in court in the Southern District of New York. He testified in a courthouse that stands 1,000 feet from that courtroom that stands 1,000 feet from where the World Trade Center once stood. And that is what blew them up, was that the feds knew that they, and so later on, as we move forward, as we go forward, and they're terrified of what I know, they also have confirmations from this very credible witness, very methodical, careful, precise. He's not a peace activist who's passionately opposed to the war in Iraq. He's not a radical 9/11 truther. He's somebody who is just this very calm.
Yeah, you said but you are charging rank and file CIA people of
I think we all did. We all did everything we could. We all did everything we could, and George Bush refused to listen. And I'll tell you, I do not blame. And what makes me angry about, I know that you like George. I figure you like George Bush. Maybe I'm wrong.
W's okay.
I know you like Dick Cheney. I know you like Dick Cheney. So I'll give you that. That Dick Cheney stood by his principles, and he was a ruthless son of a bitch. But he was the vice president.
To do with who Matt likes. I'm trying to get to.
George Bush was a coward.
Who is responsible?
Lied. George Bush was a coward who lied. I had been doing Iraqi back channel diplomacy on terrorism issues for 10 years. For 10 years. And I did a whole bunch of small cases that are just not even, like I was running an operation in Libya to get the terrorists out of Libya. So I was doing things like getting those people out, and when they would cross over into Egypt, they would, through the desert, they would magically die. So we would coordinate when they were leaving Libya, and then they would disappear in the desert. Okay. And Abu Nidal was one of the people who got evicted from Libya. And he arrived in Egypt. And when he arrives in Egypt, he puts a contract out on me with Ahmed Jibril. And then I have people sleeping in my house, spook people, Secret Service people, defense intelligence people sleeping in my house, because they know that because they are receiving independent, not from me, they're receiving independent reports from other intelligence agencies that there's a contract out on me. And so repeatedly, for about 6 or 7 months, I repeatedly had to have people staying with me when they would, when they put, in fact, I have a really wonderful, fun story that I had told this story when I was having my big fight with the feds, and they're like, how could you possibly think that George Bush was not the best president in the whole world? I said, George Bush was a coward and a liar. He lacked the courage of conviction to shoulder the responsibility for what he did, and he wanted to scapegoat somebody else. He could not handle that. And so he blamed the intelligence community, which we shouted from the rooftops about 9/11. We shouted from the rooftops that Iraq was going to be, that Iraqis did not, that the Iraqi exiles were falsifying intelligence on non-existent weapons of mass destruction. And instead of saying, I take responsibility for my mistakes, they martyred me by arresting me and not even being able to tell the truth about who I was, because I was the one who negotiated the return of the weapons inspectors, and I made 11 reports to my cousin Andrew Card, who was White House Chief of Staff to George Bush. So everything that I was doing was not only going to Richard Fuisz, it was also going to Andrew Card, which that George Bush was fully aware of it. He knew everything, and they need research. So then you have to look at the fact that they were afraid. And so now, to be fair to the Pentagon, so now I'm going to step back. I'm going to show you another side of it. So I'm showing.
Wait a minute. Whoa. Wait, this is what I wanted to avoid, because I wanted to get to the technical issues of 9/11.
Okay.
We'll get back to Andy Card.
Okay.
Because he figures key, and not in a way that you're going to appreciate, but he figures into this.
Yeah.
But for the moment, you will say that you're convinced that everybody at the CIA who knew and the administration were active participants in the Twin Towers, in 9/11.
No, not everyone is active participants, but I will tell you, like Richard Fuisz was next door neighbors to Secretary of State Colin Powell. So they knew who he was. Okay, everybody knew Richard Fuisz was CIA. Everyone knew that I was working with Richard Fuisz as his team, on his team, and that I was in direct contact, and that everything that I did was reported back to the CIA and back to the Pentagon.
And the CIA sat on the fact. By this time,
they didn't sit on the fact. They had a presidential briefing memo to through Richard Clarke on August 6th, which my team contributed to.
That memo, or that briefing by Clarke, did not say airliners hijacked and piloted and crashed into buildings and weaponized. It talked about caution. It talked about, we have people, we know they're in this country. And this is late getting there, by the way, because of stovepiping. But they started to figure out there is some kind of air threat. But at no point, I do not believe, because no one has ever presented me with the evidence.
I was sending you the evidence.
That's not evidence. I don't believe.
I did it. I did it on August 8th. I called the Office of Counterterrorism. They had classified. They had to classify the phone conversation. So I mean, it's like my phones were tapped. And when I had my big fight with the feds, they had to classify the conversations to hide the conversations from discovery.
You told him exactly what?
We were seeking fragments, any fragment of intelligence involving.
That was the Iraqi side. I'm talking about when you
John Ashcroft.
Ashcroft.
We were seeking an emergency broadcast alert across all federal agencies, seeking any fragment of intelligence involving airplane hijackings and or airplane bombings, and a strike on the World Trade Center, as a known target. We expected mass casualties and a possible mini nuclear device, and that it was imminent. The attack was imminent. That was on August 8th. Immediately thereafter, then that lady who answered the phone gave me the phone number for the Office of Counterterrorism. She said, repeat this message exactly to them. Call them up and say exactly what you said to me to them. I did that, and they put out a broadcast alert that reached Minnesota, the FBI in Minnesota, and Colleen Rowley, who was working at Minneapolis, and her colleagues said, whoa, we do have something odd. We have hijackers who've been flying. We have the 19th hijacker who has come in, and we have his electronic devices, and we want the FBI's permission. We want the Attorney General's permission to open up the electronic devices so we can see what's on them, because we think
I believe that request was advanced like September 8th, not August.
No, that was in August.
That they wanted to
That was in August.
Okay.
But it took a while. But what they did, yeah, Moussaoui, yeah, and that was Moussaoui, and so mine was August 8th, and then it took John Ashcroft weeks so they put their stuff in like August 20th, and then over the next 10 days, John Ashcroft stonewalled them. And wouldn't let him open it, wouldn't let him open it. And then finally, at the very last minute, he kind of broke down and gave them partial access.
Not to.
But they wanted Attorney General John Ashcroft to give them permission to do it and to get behind them so they could do it. And John Ashcroft refused. He really failed us. And then what makes me angry, and it really does make me angry, was because then they come back at me. And I'm the one who told them to do it. I was the one who gave the warnings. I was the one who negotiated the Iraqi weapons inspections. Everything that I did was scrutinized. I could see from the surveillance that was running around my operation that they were all in place. Everybody was in place watching everything that I did. They were showing up. The rooms were bugged exactly the way they're supposed to be. All the things were right. So what was happening was the intelligence community did a lot of things right. Now, not everybody did, and it was certainly politicized against the Iraqi government, and we all know that. But there were a lot of people who did, even if they disagree, even if they're like you, for example, and they disagree with me on my positions on the Arabs, like they're not Arabists, I would be considered an Arabist. But if they're like hardcore neocons, they did their jobs correctly. They followed the protocols for overseeing meetings of this nature, and they were doing exactly the right things at exactly the right times. They were showing up where they were supposed to be and watching everything. There was heavy surveillance. Exactly at this point of time, the British government had a conversation with for Condoleezza Rice, and they said, what if it turns out that Iraq doesn't have anything to do with 9/11? What are we going to do? And she said, and they knew. See, this was a problem. George Bush wanted that war. The intelligence was stacked up against him, and I was the one. And I was this little person. And George Bush was like, "We got to shut her up, shut her up." I was anti-war.
Bush knew who you were, and George Bush wanted you shut up.
Yes, of course. Andy Card was my cousin.
And George Bush knew that in early September, planes were going to smash into the Twin Towers.
Yes. Oh, he knew in August. He knew in May. Because when I had gone back to the Iraqi diplomats, I had already told, I was ordered to tell them that the threat of mass punitive bombing, where they'd be bombed harder than they'd ever been hit before, back to the Stone Age, and the Iraqis had been bombed so many times so hard that it was hard for them to even grasp.
We've talked about that, and again, it doesn't matter because they didn't have it. They didn't have the intelligence.
They didn't have it. But George Bush But George Bush could not take It really failed as president by not taking responsibility for his own decision, and then trying to scapegoating somebody who, if anything, I was right about every single thing I said.
In hindsight, we're
Everything
always
I
right.
said.
You know, I mean, I could
Oh,
write a
no,
book.
no. On paper, at the time all of this is going on, when if you were to look at the briefings that I gave, I think I sent you some of those briefings. If you've read some of those, you'll see that as real time, in real time.
I don't think you sent me briefings. You sent me a couple of the legal documents.
Okay, I sent you. Didn't I send you the Colin Powell letters? In real time,
the Colin Powell letters, which I had a problem with too. And again, Big Richard the man, Richard the guy, lives next door to Colin Powell. Wait for it.
I'm the one who's in contact with the Iraqis. I am the primary source of intelligence.
Wait for it. He's in charge of you. Richard is your boss. You give Richard the information. Colin Powell lives next door.
It's up to me.
Knock on the door and say, Cole, we got a problem. We got to talk. He can't.
Colin Powell and Richard Fuse hated each other.
That's neither here nor there. That doesn't.
Okay, but I am the primary source of intelligence. I'm the one who's actually engaging in direct contact with the Iraqis.
Almost never primary source discusses anything with a high-ranking official. Primary source
is a whistleblower situation. It is a whistleblower situation where I went to Colin Powell and I said, the Iraqi exiles are lying to you. They are lying about, they have fabricated and falsified reports of non-existent weapons of mass destruction, and they are falsifying reports. And I knew that and I went to him twice in January of 2003 before his big speech at the United Nations, and I explained to him that I delivered papers to him, and they were letters that I had sent to Andy Card, and in real time. All of this is happening in real time, not in retrospect, like 6 months after it happens. I'm like doing it at the moment that it's going on. And so I am the primary.
My assertion, my suggestion, then again, as playing the devil's advocate, is you're writing it as a narrative of what happened then when.
I'm writing it. I'm writing it. This is happening today at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 9:05 in the morning, I'm reporting it to you. And so I'm reporting it in real time as it's moving forward.
I'm talking about the book. The book.
Okay, but I mean, but my documentation
could have been written,
But my documentation shows that that I was like on the day that John McCain and Dick Cheney demanded that the Iraqis had to allow the interview with Al-Anai. I was in the Iraqi embassy on that day as they were having their Sunday morning talk show meetings. I was driving to New York. By 11 o'clock in the morning, I was in New York inside the embassy, and I said, Dick Cheney and John McCain want this meeting to occur. And by 1 o'clock in the afternoon on that day, the Iraqis consented, and they reiterated their willingness to have the FBI send a terrorism task force with authorization to conduct interviews, interview witnesses, and run investigations and make arrests inside Iraq involving terrorism. And it had to be the FBI or Interpol or Scotland Yard. It had to be law enforcement.
News as a proposal beforehand. That we wanted people inside. We wanted people doing investigations, and it wasn't just Iraq. We were making the demand of several Middle Eastern countries. So
I was dealing with Libya too. I was the one having those conversations with the Libyan government. See, part of the problem was
the spokespeople would be out there saying, this is what we want. Meanwhile, you'd be going to their embassy saying, this is what we want. Same
And
thing.
the Iraqis would be giving their response to me, and then I would be reporting it back. And I would be reporting it back to Andy Card, which is when it becomes when Andy Card and George Bush decide they have to lie about everything. The whole government, and part of it is the Republicans who are afraid of the Democrats. There is, at this point, becomes talks of impeaching George Bush. There is talk of impeaching Dick Cheney, and John McCain is running for it. Wants
Their
to run
favorite
for
activity.
what?
Impeachment is their favorite activity.
I know. Yeah, I know. And they are trying to protect themselves from exposure. And that's what it's all about. And they are scared of exposure, and and then you have the person who actually did it, who told you not to go to war. I was the one saying the Iraqi exiles were falsifying intelligence. I was the one who was saying 6 months before 9/11, the Iraqis agreed to invite the FBI into Baghdad with authority to run terrorism investigations. And we could have avoided the 9/11 attack entirely, but George Bush did not want to avoid
They didn't have the intel, and
they needed
they
the 9/11 attack as a Pearl Harbor so they could start the war, and that was always what it was about.
Still a non sequitur. Iraq, where we were going to send our FBI guys, didn't have the intel we were looking for. You said that. They didn't have it. So how could we, by going to Iraq, how could we have then avoided 9/11 if they didn't have the intelligence?
Frozen. Okay.
Oh, now we're back.
Okay. We did not have, the United States did not have the justification for the war that George Bush and Dick Cheney desperately wanted.
That's not a logical sequence.
It is a logical
sequence. If Iraq does not have the intel,
but they were insisting it did have the intel. And imagine if we'd gone into Congress and said, the Iraqis said, we don't have anything, but you're welcome to come look for it. That's what they said. Come into we don't have anything to hide. Come on in here, look around, do whatever you want to do, and you'll find out we don't have anything. So we're going to clear ourselves from any suspicion by inviting you to come in. Now, if Congress had known that, they would have lost the justification that they were desperately holding the attack, and they were trying desperately. But the problem was that in real time, in April and May of 2001, when the whole, I believe that 9/11, and most people believe that 9/11 was a setup for the war. They needed the 9/11 attack in order as a Pearl Harbor moment so that they could justify the invasion. And that's what this was all about.
Let's go back one more time. If Iraq does not have the 9/11 intel and we go to Iraq,
then we find out.
How would that have avoided 9/11? If they didn't have that intelligence we would have needed to avoid 9/11.
We would have avoided the Iraq War, is what we would have avoided. We would have avoided a false justification for the war. And the whole point of 9/11 was to create that justification.
Okay. Now you're saying directly. That George Bush and all the people in the CIA who knew, participated, actually were co-conspirators in the murder of 3,000 people.
That is certainly one way of looking at it.
That's the way you're stating it. That's not a way of looking at it. You just said that's why it occurred.
Okay, that is why it occurred. But here's the problem: was that throughout the spring and summer, in April, May, June, July, and August, the Iraqis repeatedly said over and over and over that if the United States wanted to come in and right up to 9/11, if the United States wanted to send in a task force to hunt out that attack, they would do it. They were welcome to come in because the Iraqis had nothing to hide, and that as soon as the FBI were to come in, they would find out that Iraq had nothing to do with it. and that they could then strike the Iraqis off the list.
Right.
Like, oh, we're worried about Iraq. Okay, so we'll strike them. We'll investigate. We'll strike them out.
The war is one thing, and I think it was a war of convenience, a war of policy.
Yeah.
But I'm still stuck
But
on.
they needed the people
Stuck on. We needed to knock down the Twin Towers
to get the Iraqi war to happen.
I mean,
To get
FDR.
the Iraqi war, we needed. The sanctions were unpopular. The sanctions were the whole global community was sick of the war of harassing the Iraqis.
I remember. I was there. I was alive.
Yeah.
That doesn't make George Bush, Dick Cheney.
I think you're defending them. I think you're defending them.
Murderers. You're calling them mass murderers right now.
I'm saying that they are psychopaths. That is different. I am saying that they are.
Did they allow 9/11 to happen?
Did
they participate in 9/11?
They allowed. They knew it was coming. They knew that they had an opportunity to challenge to confront the Iraqis in person. They knew they wanted to blame. Okay, here's a better way to put it. They wanted to. We all knew the 9/11 attack was going to happen. We all knew it. Everybody knew it.
Not everybody.
George Bush knew. George Bush knew. Dick Cheney knew. Donald Rumsfeld knew.
You cannot.
I was told to blame. I was told to say that the order to bomb Iraq came from the highest levels of government, above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State.
That's what Richard told you. That doesn't make it true. That does not make it true. and that has nothing to do with my assertion. You are saying these guys all knew and participated in the murder of 3,000 people. That includes half the CIA.
They're psychopaths. They are psychopaths.
All the people in the chain of command and CIA, from you all the way to the president, knew.
No, I'm saying that they all knew. Yes, everybody knew that this was more widely debated.
And participated.
You realize, but it was always debated, and it was huge amounts of frenzied discussions about this. We tried to stop it, and everybody knew it was happening. We tried to stop it from happening. And then we would run into some idiot like John Ashcroft, who apparently, when I hung up the phone, I am told, it was reported to Congress that after I called on August 8th, now this is reported to Congress because they wanted to know, what did John Ashcroft do when he heard this message? They said he laughed. He said, oh, those CIA people, they keep talking about this attack. And then he laughed. And it was, that kind of psychopathic reaction. I think that afterwards, John Ashcroft deserved to be fired. He did a terrible job as Attorney General. And when he saw the magnitude of what had happened, I think that George Bush and Dick Cheney and John Ashcroft were like, oh God, what have we done? What have we done? But in the build up to it, like George Bush, when he was confronted by Richard Clarke with the presidential briefing memo, he said, okay, his exact words were, you've covered your ass, now let's go play golf.
Go hit some balls.
That's what he said.
And
on August 6th.
He was saying.
That's what he said.
What he was saying
he did know, and they all just kind of dismissed the warnings. But they absolutely knew. And then, they wanted
probably
to blame,
were a part of every morning brief.
They wanted to blame the Iraqis. They looked at that as a great opportunity to start the war and blame the Iraqis. So they were going to blame the Iraqis and get the war moving, and they were going to get what they wanted. Did they realize what it would cost the country to watch the horrific demolition of those towers over and over, 1,000 times an hour on television, on every television channel that there was? And I don't think that they understood the magnitude of trauma for the nation when the building actually came down, when the towers actually imploded.
That debate, by the way, that debate died before the war. Iraq was part of 9/11. That
Oh, of course.
debate was dead before.
But the lie about the weapons of mass destruction, they were clutching onto any excuse that they could to try to justify a war. They wanted a war.
And they already had, through the UN, based on Iraq's flouting the no-fly zones, they already had basically.
But Iraq wasn't flouting the no-fly zones. Iraq didn't have any military. Iraq didn't have an air force, so they didn't have any excuses.
They didn't have a military. Is that what you just said?
They did not have an air force. Iraq had no air force.
Helicopters, and they had jets which were grounded. They had
jets that were grounded. They had no air force, so they didn't have any justification. They didn't have any justifications for the war. They were looking for anything they could get. 9/11 was dramatic enough that it could be manipulated in the eyes of the public, trying to get the war going.
And that's where we diverge heavily. Think of FDR. Very soon after Pearl Harbor, people started saying he knew. He did know. There was.
Well, we did know. We knew.
Wait, there was chatter. There was the assumption that if we backed the Japanese into a corner, they would attack us. Nobody knew Pearl Harbor was coming, even though that had been war gamed earlier. They pictured what did happen, Guam and possibly PI. They told everybody to get ready.
But in 9/11, we did know.
The worry in Hawaii was sabotage. So they lined up all the aircraft where they could keep an eye on them out there in a row, made great targets.
Yeah.
And I believe, because nobody has proven anything of what you're saying yet, that, as a matter of fact, I was there too. I'm not a neophyte. There was chatter. There was discussion. We knew something was coming. We knew something was in the wind. Bush knew something was in the wind. Clark told him, we got a little bit more of what's in the wind. We had yet to find anything where we could go bust somebody, go kill somebody.
That's right. They had
didn't have it yet.
But they were trying so hard to nail the Iraqis. They were like threatening the Iraqis. I was ordered to threaten the Iraqis.
I'm talking about domestically. The CIA.
There was no justification for the war.
CIA knew about 8 of those guys that come into the country were on the watch list. They didn't tell the FBI. The FBI guy got wind of it through another route, and he had been spending almost an entire year trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Some other person from all the way over in PI to, I think this Minnesota lady might be the one, I'm not sure.
Colleen Rowley.
Knew we had guys of Mideastern descent. She didn't know that it was the guys the CIA knew about. We're asking to fly planes, simulators, and they didn't need to know how to land or take off. We just want to learn how to fly them. She thought that was weird. Somebody in her chain of command said, don't put your head above the hill here, just relax. And they sat on it. When the chatter increased, stuff did start going up the pipe, like September 8th, maybe 6th, where a lot of information now was pouring into the White House. But it had not been curated. It had not been analyzed. It was coming up from the separate stovepipes.
And yet, we had already warned. See, and that's where you're wrong. That's just factually wrong, because we had known about it for months. We had known about it for months. And we'd already I personally did it. I personally warned the Iraqis about it. I personally called the Office of Attorney General John Ashcroft, and there was a witness testified in federal court that a civilian that I did break protocols and told him, because he had family in Connecticut and they spent a lot of time going into Manhattan. And I said, stay out of the city. Do not go into the city. We're expecting a major attack involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World
Like I said, I haven't read that transcript, but you say it's in the book? Transcript? Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll give you that.
Okay.
Then we get to the day of, and the federal government has coordinated the demolition of the towers, which in both cases starts on the floors that were hit. And they coordinated it so when these planes hit on these floors, we'll start blowing the thing up and it'll collapse. That you're saying that's what they did?
I believe it was a demolition, yes.
And this demolition you talk about starts on the floors that were hit by the planes. You can see it. You can watch it.
Yeah, yes.
So how
It
could
is
they
not possible. It is not possible for an airplane for an airplane crashing into a building to bring down steel. It doesn't happen that way.
If the airplane were empty and crashed, it would do a lot of damage, may not bring it down.
Yeah.
But you were watching aluminum get
And
melted.
also the fires burned in the basement. The fires burned under the basement for months, which would indicate a mini nuke.
I'll have to check.
I'll
have to check on that one. A subterranean fire, that foundation is pretty stout. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons they didn't simply fall over when hit by aircraft were the foundation, and those things which would end up being fatal would be the dampeners, the little connections at the end of the floor joists. And the floor joists aren't any great shakes. They were standard engineered beams. They weren't.
They're steel.
But that was the fail point.
But there's only certain types of explosives that would be capable of melting steel. And a fire, like a fire of an airplane striking the World Trade Center and starting a local fire would be highly localized on that floor, and it would burn the drywall, it would burn the electrical wiring, but it wouldn't burn through the steel, the molten steel, and it wouldn't. That would require thermite
steel. How did they bend railroad ties in the Civil War? That was an act of sabotage both sides did to each other. It was very easy. How'd they do it? Heat them up. Just heat them. You heat them up, and then you have a mule pull them around a tree. And now you've got a U. Can't use that anymore. So you wreck the railroad, you bend the ties. You do it with a simple fire.
Yeah, it's got it, but a fire from an airplane, of a single airplane, and then bringing the whole building down in 10 seconds, that's a demolition.
No, it didn't happen in 10 seconds. It was first an impact
15 seconds.
of 400,000 pounds at 400 miles an hour with 20,000 gallons of fuel. And this is going to sound heartless what I'm about to say. 20,000 gallons of fuel, which ignites, it takes out 60% of the center tube beams over several floors. Okay, so now you have a massive loss of strength in the building. It takes out several of the floor's surfaces. The actual floor joists and the floor itself, they get destroyed. And inside that plane, you have that which makes a hotter fire than jet fuel. And that is human flesh compressed into the nose of that plane.
That's only a couple hundred people.
What's that?
A couple hundred people and human flesh. Most of those people, they would not all be killed on impact.
They were crushed into a mass at the front of the airplane. The airplane was crushed to like half its size.
Mm-hmm.
And that is ample.
But that's not going to bring down a building in 30 seconds.
Well,
It's not.
We're going to test Occam's razor here. When those people and any organics, any wood, anything that forms that can form to an ember burns, it burns hotter than jet fuel. And the jet
But
fuel
you're talking
alone,
about burning an entire every beam, every steel beam and an entire building for bringing down a building in 30
no, you
seconds.
don't. You need to deflect a key member. And that's exactly what happened. The tube in tube design depends on the floors. The floors need to exist for the building to
But
be
also,
strong.
and then the basement burned, and the basement had molten steel running through it for months. And it is
I
not
have to look at that one. I have
It is
never heard that
not
before today.
consistent. Yeah, I've never heard your story before today.
Well,
This
well,
is
that's good
this is
because
this is
I have two
because they
websites.
had the firefighters reported it, that there was molten steel running in the basement for a month until like January. And so this is what the firefighters were saying. The firefighters said, who were on site, said that they heard popping sounds throughout the building, and as they were running for the doors, they could hear the explosions going bang, 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 bang. They could hear
Oh,
it.
you're talking about the
They were-
collapse. I thought you're back to 93 with molten steel in the basement and all that.
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm talking about the World Trade Center.
Molten steel, not molten aluminum.
Well, it's molten, yeah, molten steel. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't heard about that. I saw what's assumed to be molten aluminum dribbling out of that corner. The first part of the building to collapse at one point.
The firefighters heard the popping bombs, and they said they know what bombs, they know how fire sounds, and they said that it was explosions that were going off all through.
I just this morning, in preparation for this show, I listened to a fireman saying, "We heard the building collapsing over us." It started out slow, boom, 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 and then it got faster, and then it became one noise. He did not say explosions or bombs.
Well, but there have been a lot of there's a lot of firefighters who have said that they have heard explosions.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to go. I'm going to go with physics
We have okay. Well, we have
over
we have differences.
over the
We have differences. We have differences. Okay, listen. It's 4:30 now. Do you want to do a third show?
Um, we could, because I want to get back to Richard and Paul. I'll say this about Paul. Um, Another saying I like is falsus in unum, falsus in omnibus. Lie to me once. You know, if you're a storyteller.
Whoa,
That story-
man,
that
never
story-
at all. I don't have to lie. I've had testimony in federal
I'm
court.
talking about Paul. I'm talking about Paul.
Paul doesn't lie either. Paul
Did Paul tell you that story about blowing up a gas station with a missile in it?
Yes,
It never happened.
yes, it did.
Let me give you the dates.
I know the guy who did it.
Um,
I know the guy who did it. I know the guys who were there. So
the monkeys,
I'm sorry. I know
the Ebola
I know
monkeys.
the guy. I know that. I
Ebola
know that.
monkeys.
In fact, you can actually there's a that you let's see. I think it's called Hotspot.
Yeah,
I
I know
think-
you did recommend that. But
I think it's
I'm gonna
called
tell you
Hotspot.
the story
And
as it was being reported.
You should actually see that, because that is about the events. That's
Okay.
that's a
If it
telling
has a
story.
gas station blowing up, it's not about the event. There were the Ebola monkeys were in Reston.
Yeah.
One did get away.
Yep.
But it didn't go to a gas station. It was coaxed out of a tree on the site and destroyed with the rest of the monkeys.
But the truck had stopped at a gas station, and there had been blood from the monkeys there was blood from the monkey that had been shot, and the blood ended up on the pavement, and they didn't know what the impact would be, so therefore they wanted to just use fire to take out the whole thing.
Well, there were two
And
fires.
I know, and I will tell you, the witness that I had would later become the chief of staff to the Senate Finance Committee. and he worked for Senator Grassley
More confusing
as
days.
legislative director. His
Okay.
name was Dean Zerby, and he was legislative director for Senator Grassley, and then became chief of staff, administrative assistant, administrative aide, top administrative aide for the Senate Finance Committee.
Okay.
So
They were-
that's actually a true story.
In
That's
the
absolutely.
the Reston monkey situation took place in 89. Between 80 and 95, there were 2 gas fires in Reston. One was a natural gas transfer station, which had a valve open.
Well, they silence this stuff. They censor it. It's like they make things disappear. They make stories like this disappear.
Well,
They
then
do that.
there wasn't.
And what you should do is you should call Dean Zerby, Zerbe. Last time I heard, he was now an attorney in Houston, and say just talk to him privately and say, you had this interesting conversation. You wanted to hear if this was really true or not. Did Dean Zerby really participate in something like this?
So somebody made a gas station fire go away.
Yeah,
and
just
all of Reston
talk to
forgot about it.
talk to Dean Zerby. He's the one who did it.
Well,
he's the
the
one who was
other
there.
fire I have on record was in 83.
I don't know
The
what
gas
year it was.
station fire, and that gas station fire was started by an unauthorized anti-tank round.
Oh, talk to Dean Zerby. That's his story. So talk to Dean Zerby.
Okay. I thought you said it was Paul that did it. I thought you said Paul.
Yeah, Dean Zerby was there. Paul was actually no.
Paul's still alive.
What?
Is Paul?
Talk to Dean Zerby.
Is Paul still alive? Paul
No, Paul died in 2012, I think.
and Richard? Richard's still kicking, right?
Yeah, Richard's still kicking. Yeah, but talk to Paul. Excuse me. Talk to Dean Zerby about that.
And I will put 2 links. 15-year studies, the physics of the collapse of the buildings.
Okay, I don't get. Do whatever you do. Whatever.
But
I'm just telling you.
Just saying to
I'm
the
just
audience.
telling.
I'm just saying to the audience, those links will be there for them to check. They have your book to go through. Now, did you break down? I didn't get far enough in the book. Did you break down the physics of how
No.
they blew it up?
No.
Okay. But there are guys who do that. There's a guy who
Yeah.
says he
Yeah.
can make the.
I leave that for Richard Gage and the scientists, the physicists, to
Okay.
deal with that. I don't. I just know that we knew the attack was coming, and that's my contribution to it, was that we did everything we could to stop it from happening.
All right. I got to talk to McKinley, Lord McKinley from England.
Oh, yeah, good.
I got to
Okay.
nail down his
Well-
date, and then if we can get back to the other stuff that we put like 10 pins.
Yeah,
left
we've got stuff. We've got a lot of stuff.
into that
But
stuff.
just let me know if you wanted, but anyway, so I've actually got to get somewhere to right now. It's almost 5 o'clock here. So, okay.
And good luck with the book. The camera's fine. The camera's
Excellent.
This
So
is
now better camera.
and let me know. Let me know how the book sales are going.
Okay, I will. I will let you know. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
The book is Extreme Prejudice by Susan Lindauer. You can get it on Amazon. Susan, thanks for being with us. Good debate. Good debate.
Good debate.
We
Good
don't
debate.
we don't normally get this fiery here at the P4B. But, that was fun. That was fun.
Yes.
All right, kiddo.
Okay. Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Well, we didn't get to everything again. We did get to 9/11. We did get at least, we got Susan's point of view out of the way, and mine. Like I said, the links are there. In the next few weeks, we will have Lord Mackinlay. You may have heard me mention that during the show. He is the leading skeptic, leading global warming, climate change green movement skeptic in the United Kingdom. And I look forward to talking to him. We will have him on probably in June, it looks like, but can't guarantee it. Thanks for being with us.
Please tell a friend about the Free Zone Communique. We live and die with the share and subscribe buttons. Please use affiliate and sponsor buttons to support our work. Thank you very much for joining us today.